Jayda and Stitches Show. We've got a lovely scarf for you today, and not just your typical scarf pattern either. We are going to experiment with the Jacob's ladder stitch. Now there are a lot of different ways you can make the Jacob's ladder, a lot of different variations, and we are just focusing on a single color today. So more importantly, it's how you get that really cool braided effect running up a piece of fabric. This looks complicated, but it is crazy easy. So I don't want you to think that this is an intermediate or an advanced or anything like that. If you're a beginner and you know how to do double crochets and chains, then you can do the Jacob's ladder stitch. And making a scarf is a great way to practice it. It's not a very wide piece. We are only going to do 2 sets of ladders running up the scarf as we go. And this is a nice width for adults and children alike, on account of the fact that we're using a super bulky size 6 yarn. And today we are going to use Woolies by Lion Brand. Woolies is a wonderful acrylic wool mix. It's 80% acrylic, 20% wool, size 6, super bulky. It comes in a whole bunch of different colors and colorways, and we will link to lionbrand.com down below so you can pop over there and check out all the different colors that Woolies comes in. Specifically the thick and quick that we're using for today's project, and we would like to thank Lion Brand Yarns for sponsoring today's video. If you do not want to use a wool-based yarn, and I know some of you have a sensitivity to that, then the other Lion Brand yarn I would like to recommend for today's project is Hometown. Hometown is 100% acrylic. It is a size 6 super bulky weight yarn. It is kind of shiny. It's a very nice yarn. We will put a couple of photographs up here too, and of course you can see all that plus the Woolies Thick and Quick on the Lion Brand website. All you have to do is pop over to Lion Brand, select yarn weight category, which you can do under the search realm, and check out the size 6 super bulky weight yarns. And I would recommend either the Woolies Thick and Quick or the Hometown for today's project. I'm using 2 skeins of the Woolies Thick and Quick today. That's 2 regular sized balls of it. But if you want a really long scarf or a really wide scarf, then you're going to want 3 or 4 balls in the same color to make one scarf, because this is a super bulky yarn and it does crochet up relatively quickly. We're also using a big hook today. So we'll tell you more about that in the materials section. Let's grab our hooks, grab our Woolies Thick and Quick. We'll head on over to the craft table and we will stitch up a brand new Jacob's ladder scarf together. For today's scarf, I've got 2 skeins of Woolies Thick and Quick by Lion Brand. These are regular size balls. Each of them is 140 grams or 87 yards. 2 is enough for an adult and definitely for a child. If you want a really long scarf though, you may need 3. This is a super bulky size 6 yarn. I've got a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. I'm using a really big hook today, a 10mm, also known as an N or a P. I'm pretty sure it's a P. It looks like Clover couldn't make up its mind which was which here. But if you have tight tension, you may need an even larger hook. If you have really loose tension, you may need a smaller hook. What we're going for here is a nice drapey, easygoing fabric. You don't want anything stiff because stiff scarves aren't terribly comfortable. And when you're working with a super bulky weight yarn, it is easy to get a little tight and a little stiff. So a really big hook. You also might find a measuring tape is handy if you're making this scarf for someone other than yourself. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. This pattern can be worked over a foundation chain row that is any multiple of 6 plus 2 extra chains for turning at the end. But owing to the heavy, thick nature of the yarn we're using, I recommend a foundation chain row of 14 for both children and adults. Once you have a foundation chain row that is 14 chains long, or a multiple of 6 plus 2 for turning, we are going to skip the first 3 chains from the hook and double crochet into the 4th chain. The turning chains at the end of every row count as a double crochet stitch, so when you get back across the next row, you will always be working the last stitch of the row into the top of your turning chains. We're going to double crochet into the next chain, and we're going to start our first loop. Chain 10,
Come all the way back down to that double crochet you just made and slip your hook right through the top of it. You're going to slip stitch, and you've just created a 10 chain loop. You're going to now double crochet into each of the next 6 chains. So we all have something that looks like this. Turning chains count as a double crochet, double crochet, double crochet, chain 10 loop, and then a double crochet into each of those 6 chains, and we're going to do a chain 10 loop again. So chain 10, come back to the top of that last double crochet you made, slip stitch right into the top of it. That creates your loop. And now you'll have 3 chains left. If you were making a much wider piece, you would work a double crochet into the next 6 chains and then make a chain 10 loop, double crochet into the next 6 chains, make a chain 10 loop, etc. But we're only making this pattern repeat once because of the thickness of the weight of our yarn. So we'll all have 3 chains left, and we're going to double crochet into each of them. At the end of this row, we will all have 12 stitches and 2 chained loops. At the end of every row, we chain 2 and turn. This chain 2 counts as a double crochet. So when you turn your work, you are not using this stitch as the first place you double crochet into. I know it's tempting, but that is actually in use. The chain 2 counts as a stitch, so it is using this stitch right here. Instead, you're going to double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches that begin the row. All of our chain 10 loops must sit directly on top of each other. So chain 2, turn, double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. We are on an even row. On an even row, you take the loop from the previous row and push it forward or to the back. Push it away from you. We are going to chain 10. Come all the way back down to the top of your double crochet, slip stitch to join. That finishes your little chain 10 loop. Make sure that this is pushed forward and it reveals the next stitch. If you ever get lost, you know you have 6 double crochets between your chained loops, so just look for them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're working right into the top of that chained loop. We want to make sure that we have both our loops to the back or pushed away from us, and it does get easier as you go. Double crochet into the next stitch and then double crochet into each of the next 5. So you're always going to have 6 double crochet stitches between your chained loops. This is the very middle of the scarf. Make sure you have 6 before you make your next chained loop. This is what's going to keep the consistency up the scarf. Chain 10. Come on back down to that last double crochet you made and slip stitch into the top of it. Make sure that your loop is pushed forward because we're on an even row. So get all your loops out of the way. You'll have 3 double crochet left for the row. So double crochet into each of the remaining 3 stitches, and remember that the last one will be the turning chains from the previous row. So you double crochet into the top of the turning chains, and you have 6 stitches. 6 stitches and 2 loops in every single row. 3, 6, 3, interrupted by 2 chain 10 loops. At the end of every even row, your loops should all be on the other side, so the side facing away from you. At the end of every row, chain 2 and turn. On odd rows, like row 3, all of your loops should be on the front or facing you. Every row begins the same. Chain 2 counts as double crochet. You do not use this stitch. You double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches instead. That brings you up to the first loop that you need to make. Every loop is chain 10. Come back to the top of that last double crochet you made, slip stitch, and now because we're on an odd row and we want all our loops to the front, make sure that all of your loops are pulled forwards before you double crochet into your next stitch. Here's my next stitch. It sits right at the base of the chains from the previous row, but if you get lost, just pull it apart and look for those 6 stitches. And this one is right here underneath my loops. So make sure you're always putting 6 double crochet in between your chained loops. On an odd row, all of those loops should be on the front. On an even row, all of the loops should be pushed to the back. And the reason we do this is because when we get to the point where we want to braid up our loops, we need them all on one side of the scarf. There should always be 6 double crochet between your loops. Pause if you're not sure and make sure that they're there. And then make your last loop of the row. That's a chain 10. Come back and slip stitch into the top of that last double crochet you made. We're on an odd row. Make sure that all of your loops are pulled forward, and you'll have 3 stitches left to double crochet into. Remember, the last one is actually the top of the turning chains. So just make sure that your rows all have 3 double crochet, a loop, 6 double crochet, a loop, and then 3 double crochet to finish. And the last stitch of every row is worked into the top of the turning chains from the previous row. Easy peasy. Just double check when you've finished a row that all of your loops are on the same side. So on an odd row finished, they'll all be facing this way. When you finish an even row, they'll all be facing away from you. You won't see any loops at all. All right, I'm going to let you guys work away at that for a little bit, and I'll be back shortly to talk about scarf lengths. I've worked 6 rows so far of the pattern, and now you can really see this coming together. So I've just finished an even row, and all of my loops are sitting on this side. I'm about to start an odd row, so I would keep all of my loops pressed to the front as I work. The important thing is that all of your loops always sit on one side or the other. You're not supposed to have a couple loops back here and a couple loops out here. Make sure all your loops are always on the same side. Using this hook and this yarn, my gauge is roughly 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters per row in height. So at the end of row 6, I'm at 15 centimeters or 6 inches. I will get roughly 24 inches out of a single skein. So I'm probably going to use almost both of my skeins completely in order to make my adult scarf. That will bring me up to about 46 inches, which is a nice length for adults, with a little bit of finishing at the top and the bottom. For children, you can make it a little shorter. I would recommend maybe 30 inches, but length is entirely up to you. If you want it a little shorter, make fewer rows. If you want it even longer, add more rows, but you may end up needing extra yarn, like I mentioned in the material section. So this is a really bulky weight yarn, and it does get eaten up quickly with the big hook and the nice tall stitches. So aim for 30 rows for children, 46 rows for adults, and I will see you there. I have completed 45 rows now of this double crochet with the little chain 10 loops. So I've got enough left to finish my last row with a little tiny bit left over. So I'm going to call it at 45 because I still have 1 row left to go, number 46. If you were making it for a child, you definitely were able to put in 30 rows. And like I said, if you were going to make it longer, you would definitely need an extra ball of yarn for that purpose. All right, so I'm at row 45. I'm going to pull up on my loop and I'm going to put my hook aside. This is where now we have to start to braid. So the whole thing, what you're going to do is make sure once again that you kept all of your loops on one side of the scarf. I am now looking at the front of the scarf where all my loops are, and we're going to start to braid up our loops. It's really easy. You're going to do one vertical column first and then the other vertical column. You start right down at the bottom, you hold up the first loop, find the loop in row 2 and pull it through the loop of row 1. Pick up the loop of row 3 and pull it through the loop of row 2. Pick up the loop of row 4 and pull it through the loop of row 3. And this is what you get. You can kind of tug down. You're picking up each successive row's loop and pulling it through the loop of the row before. This is really easy to do. It's a lot of fun. And of course you get this absolutely scrumptious braided look going. So this is going to take you a couple minutes. Just make sure as you're pulling up on your loops that you're pulling nice and evenly. You want to get the loop from the previous row pulled down so that it sits kind of at the base of the loop that's currently on your thumb. And you want to make sure that it looks somewhat evenly situated around that loop. So just take your time. And once you've got one entire vertical row complete, back up to the bottom and do the other row. After you've done all of the sort of surface braiding, so you've pulled every single loop up through the loop of the row previous, and this will take you just a few minutes. Stand back, make sure you haven't missed any loops. Enjoy how absolutely scrumptious that looks. And you'll end up with the 2 loops from the last row poking out through the loops from the second last row up top. And now we're going to do a final row where we just sort of solidify those loops. We're going to sort of tack them into place to keep them from going anywhere. So here we go. We're going to chain 2 and turn. It doesn't matter if you end on an odd row or an even row, because this row is always going to be the same no matter what. We're going to double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches just like you would any of the other previous rows of this pattern. And where you would normally chain 10, instead you're just going to slip your hook through that top loop and slip stitch nice and gently, and then you're going to continue. Find the next stitch and double crochet into it. You're double crocheting into what will eventually be the 6 stitches in between. Make sure your little loops haven't undone on you when you get up to the next one. Same thing, slip your hook through it, just slip stitch, nice and easy, and then double crochet into the remaining 3 stitches of the scarf. And that will about do it for your yarn. Before you fasten off, take a quick look at your scarf, and you can just sort of fiddle with it to make sure that that slip stitch kind of hugs the top of your loop, so your loops will end right there at the top. Now if you want to, and this is what I recommend if you've got just enough yarn left, at the bottom of your scarf you'll have what looks like a full row of double crochet. If you have enough yarn left and you want to do a finishing row of double crochet, go ahead. I've got a few yards left here. I'm going to work a finishing row of single crochet. Nice and easy going. I'm going to chain 1, turn, and I'm just going to single crochet in every stitch, including the first one, because the chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch when you're single crocheting. I'm just going to finish off by single crocheting in each stitch all the way across. I'm skipping the little chain slip stitch that I did to secure the top of my loop. Instead, I'm just going to focus on those same 6 stitches that sit in between the loops, and I'm just finishing it off so there's a little bit of height after my last loop ends, just to match the bottom of the scarf. And if you've got more yarn, you can do a row of double crochet. And if you have less like me, you can do a row of single crochet. Or if you're somewhere in the middle, half double crochet. Just a little row of finishing is fine. That's it for my yarn. I've got quite a nice long scarf here, and all I need to do now is just weave in my tails. If you wanted to work a little border around this because you were using a different kind of yarn and you maybe wanted to disguise the edges of your the sides of your scarf, when you use a nice big bulky weight yarn, it looks nice on its own. So the raw edge is actually quite pretty. But if you wanted to work a little bit of edging, then a simple row of single crochet, 2 single crochet per double crochet stitch edge is fine all the way down. You can single crochet across the bottom just to sort of even up that foundation chain. And then you're done. Fasten off, weave in your tails. You're going to want that yarn needle. And be sure to weave your tail in back and forth a couple times. You want to lock it into place. And you can trim anything that's not necessary. And remember, if you've joined your balls of yarn as you went, you might have a couple of little outstanding tails from the points where you joined, if you didn't work over top of them. So take a moment to make sure that you've got all those little tails all woven in and taken care of. And your scarf is complete.
It is such a cool effect, and that entire braiding look is just garnered by pulling one loop through the next and through the next and through the next in a vertical line all the way up like a ladder, and it looks so cool. It adds a really amazing texture to any project, but especially a cozy scarf. We'd like to thank Lion Brand once again for sponsoring today's video. We hope you have a fun bit of time popping over to their website and checking out either the Woolies Thick and Quick, like we use today, or maybe the Hometown. If you're new to using super bulky size 6 yarns, then I like both of them, and they both would make a lovely scarf just in time for the cool weather. And that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed working on this project along with us, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches Show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye, guys!
Hi, everybody! Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.